So hi everyone, thank you for coming. It's a good turnout for a functional programming meetup. I'll take that. I want to introduce myself. I work here at the SCO. I'm a data engineer here. We don't use functional programming right now, but I wish we did. So the SCO has sponsored the pizza, the location, the video, and they're hiring. So if you're ever interested in the company, if you like what you see, you can talk to me, or I can forward you to the right person. So I started this meetup because I wanted to learn functional programming and force myself to learn by teaching. And it took me 1 year to do this, so I'm finally here. The meetup started last year. And I don't know a lot of things happening, but I'm just going to show you what I've learned for the past month and a half of trying this, and a lot of concepts may not be clear to me as well. So if you know the concepts, feel free to help me out. So PureScript is a strongly typed Haskell-like language. The selling point is that it compiles to JavaScript. So you can use it on a browser, but you can also use it with Node.js. The key difference between PureScript and Haskell, for those who do not know Haskell, is that PureScript is like JavaScript. So it's strictly evaluated, while Haskell is lazy. I think those who know Haskell will understand what it means, so I don't have to go further and explain it, unless somebody wants me to, but it seems to be everybody knows about it. Fine. So what's about PureScript Halogen? It's a browser UI library, and among the other UI libraries out there in PureScript, which mostly use React Virtual DOM, I think Halogen is the one which has created its own virtual DOM, and it's totally in PureScript. I think probably the only one which has its virtual DOM in PureScript. It's among the many UI frameworks in PureScript out there. This is the most declarative and type safe. At the same time, that could mean there's a bit more to learn in terms of its types, but actually it helps, at least it saves you with types when it has to. The main reason why I chose it was because it's more declarative and type safe, so I can learn more about PureScript with this framework. At the same time, it's used, I think this may be the most used framework in production. At least it's used by Slam Data, which is a company which uses PureScript extensively in their company. So even though it wasn't made for React or with React, in their latest versions, they have abstracted out so that you can plug in React, but it hasn't been done yet. So it's waiting for someone to do it for them. But they have abstracted out the library to plug in React if you want to. Later on, I will show you, if we have time, I'll show you an interesting talk, or interesting article, which is which talks about how Halogen's performance compared to other frameworks. And Halogen optimizes for deep updates in your components as opposed to other UI frameworks. So you have to figure out how you want to use it. So since this is a mixed group of people new to functional programming and experts, I'll just give a brief primer. So if you see the add function, it takes two variables and gives back the answer. In Haskell and PureScript, the way you write the signature is in this format, and I explain to you later why. But what it's saying is I take two parameters as input, and I give back the final one's always your final return value. So in this case, I'm taking A and B, I'm giving back A plus B. Similarly over here, this is a function or a value which does not take any input parameters. It gives back 5, therefore it gives back an int. And the reason why the signature, is written this way is you could do something like add 5. Now add, if you can see, takes 2 parameters, but you're only giving it 1. And what happens is this gives back a function, add 5, which takes the final, the B, and gives back a value. So now if you give B to be 10, because you already gave 5 before, it'll add 5 and 10 and give you 15. And that's the way you can see this signature. Is like if you only give it one value, it gives back. The way you can see it now is that if you only give it 5, it gives you back a function which takes another integer and gives you back an int. So this is a way you can read the signature. What I like about Haskell or PureScript is this way of declaring types, and this is not a perfect translation into Python, but it helps me think about it. So in Swift, for example, or other, you may have seen the option type, and maybe is the corresponding type over here. Or in Scala, I think there's option too. The corresponding type over here is a maybe. And what you're saying over here is that there's a maybe type, which we don't know what, it could be an int, or it could be a string, and that's parameters by A. It could either be nothing, or it could be a value just, and with the value inside that. So if I had to make this in Python, which is this is definitely not working Python code, you have an abstract class or a class called maybe. Your nothing will specialize as a child class or a derived class of maybe. But nothing takes no value. So in Python, you have to pass self. I should not use Python, but so there's no value over here. But just takes a value in, and as it takes a value over here, and you store that value. So this is what I see as one way of seeing maybe, and you'll see it in the examples afterwards as well. The same thing with either. Either takes two parameter, like it's parameterized on A and B. You can either have a left or a right, and the corresponding thing is very similar. You have a left either base class, you have a left derived class, and this is how I look in Python. So now we come to F. So the future versions of PureScript may not have this, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to explain it a bit. Random, F is a type which signifies any effect. So this could be writing to console or reading from console or writing to a server or reading from a server, and that effect is encapsulated with this F type. And for example over here, for random, you're saying any type F1, okay. So I'll explain that later. So F has a side effect of random, because random in some way it's not pure. It'll obviously give back a different value if you call the same function again and again. And it'll give back a number. And F1 is called a row variable. And I don't want to go deep into it, but it's saying, it's like a record. It's saying, okay, I can have random, but I can also have other effects. I don't want to think about it right now. I'm just saying that it's random and other effects. And if you see an example, I won't go into the do statement too much. So random over here returns a number, and the way you do in the do statement is you call random, and somehow it magically gets out that number for you in n. AFF is extensively used in the Halogen UI framework, and F is the asynchronous version of F. So it has the same signatures, the same context, and it's asynchronous. So that's what's mostly used in the UI framework. So now I'm going to go to my demo, and I'm going to pull this down a bit. I'm not that tall. And yeah, so this is basically a Halogen guide. It's not completely my own inspiration. And let's start this. So this is going to be pretty much same, so I'm not going to change it much. And the thing about Halogen that I have to say, there are a lot of, obviously it's PureScript and it's Halogen, there's a lot of types involved. And very often I don't even look at these types anymore. Once you know them once, I just copy paste the types. And the code by itself is a bit simpler when you understand the rhythm of Halogen. So I would say don't look too much at the types right now. We can just look at the code and explain what it does. So HA stands for Halogen, and Halogen has, I think it uses the F one, the asynchronous F that I was talking about, and it's saying run Halogen when we say await body, what this is saying is let the document load, and when the body element is available, assign it to this variable body, and then run the UI. So the interesting part over here is the component, and this is what we'll actually be building. So we'll be building smaller components, and then we'll be composing it. But the initial root component is this component over here, which I'll be talking about soon. Unit, I actually don't know if this is in Swift, but unit is, there's a type called unit, a capital UNIT, and that's a type with only one value. And the one value in the type is unit over here. And we pass the body that we get previously. So let's now build what I would call the most simplest UI component I can think of. So it's called component over here, and if I go back, if you see the component over here, I'm coming back to it, and let's get in some import Halogen as each, import Halogen HTML. As you can see, I'm new to VS Code as well, as HH. And let's come to our first concept in Halogen. So when you talk about components in Halogen, you can do an input, you can do the operations on it are of two types in general. The first type is an action, where you ask the component to change its state or do something without asking for a value and value back. The second kind of operation is called request, and request is more about you asking for a value from a component. So a root component can request some value from a child component. At the same time, the child component can change state also. So action will just ask a child to change state. A request was mostly for querying the child for values, but at the same time, it can also change state if required. This action and request concept is subsumed or is contained in this concept called query. So it's a bit like maybe they could use maybe operations would be a better word, but right now they call it query. So I would write, hey, my component uses my action and some my request, and it's both together contained in this concept query. Now, this is where I go a bit hand-wavy. Here, for Halogen, we have to pass a value A in all cases. And I'm going to build up examples slowly, and you will see how I'm using it. But if I didn't want to understand too much about the machinery of Halogen, all I have to do is say, whatever action I'm taking, let's say I'm doing increment, for example, I just have to put A at the end. And that kind of simple rule works for me very well in building Halogen apps. So in this most simplest case, I'll come to increment later. In the most simplest case, I have no query. I have no operations happening on my component. So I'm just going to call unit. Like nothing's going to happen. And input, I have no input coming in my hello world operation, so I'm going to call it unit. Output, no output. So what I'm going to use is a type called void. My small understanding of void is that, okay, unit is something where you have at least one value, and that's lowercase unit. Void, I believe, if somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that this should not happen. This value should not be called, or this should not happen. That's my understanding of void. So I'm saying my component should not send an output out to a different component. It's not possible. So let's define an initial state. And my type state, right now I have no state, so let's call a unit. And no state, so I'm going to give it unit. So let's build the first thing. So let's coming back over here to my main. It's asking for from a module component. It's asking for a function component. So let's build that. So unit capital U means it's a type. The small u means it's a value. The corresponding example, if I call this as int, that's a type. And if I give it 5, that's the value. So unit has only one value, and that's called the lowercase unit. So I'm going to first type the type as normally I would use a snippet or something in my IDE to help me out. And this looks a bit difficult, but so I'm going to build this component. I'm just going to first type it out, so then I can explain it. I'm not good at multitasking. So you can see it helps me figures it out. Okay, so let me just type this out. I'll explain what I'm typing out later. I still get used to VS Code here. Okay, so this thing doesn't change much in its style, so that's why I normally keep it as it is. And what I'm saying over here is that I'm going to return back a Halogen component parameterized for HTML. I could be wrong here, but if somebody wrote a React adapter for this, this could be something like HS React or something, and that way you can use the same code, the same architecture, or the same style to write in React too. But don't quote me on this. I think it's coming in the future. And this query is the query on top, input, output, and that's the signature for this thing. I normally just copy paste this every time I want to write something new. And what you're giving over here is a record, and which is very similar to a JavaScript record. So these are the keys on the left, render, eval, receiver, and then the values on the right. Const initial state is, so if you first look at initial state, you'll say, okay, this initial state, I can just pass this initial state over here as value. But according to the interface, this is actually not taking a value, it's taking a function. And right now, for this purposes, I'm saying, if you're taking a function, just give back the initial state as constant. So no matter what input you give this function, you return back initial state. And for all purposes right now, it's always going to be this way. Render, eval, receiver. So I'm going to talk about render and eval right now. But receiver is saying, I believe, yeah, if a root component is going to call me, what kind of input can it be? And for our simple case, again, there's no input coming in. So I believe this to be constant, like constant nothing. So whatever you call a function with, it'll always return back nothing. So let's type in render now. Render takes in a state and returns back component HTML of type query. So it takes a state, and the easiest thing I can do right now is I'm just going to return back a text field. So we slowly build it up, but right now this is like a DSL to build your HTML. And then we come to eval. Eval takes a query, that is the operations that we have, and so as I said, don't get too hung up on the signature. You normally just you don't look at too much because the code itself is evident. So over here, I'm saying this takes a query type, right? And my query type is a unit A. So that's all I have to worry about right now. And the A becomes next, and I'm not doing anything. So so pure next is a pattern that we'll use often here, and right now, in a simple way, I would just let it go for now, because to write Halogen framework, you don't really need to know, too much. You can do things between that, and I'll show you what I mean to say between that. So nothing is not there, and let's import data maybe. What I'm saying here is import the data maybe module and the maybe type as well as all its data constructors. So on the left, you call it the type constructor, and on the right, you call the data constructor. So I think what you're saying over here is, by these two dots, you're saying import all the data constructors as well. And as you saw, nothing is one of the data constructors for maybe. So let's see, there's an error. I think it's over here. Probably recompile. Okay, that works. So when it recompiles, it will compile it. I used a Halogen template, and I've put a link to it afterwards. It compiles it to this HTML. So let's see. Hello, FunctionalTO. Okay, let me put something else. So just show you that. Okay, I'm going to PureScript. And let's see. Hey, it works. So that's the hello world thing. Any questions up to this point? Okay, everybody seems, yeah.
Could you just briefly explain to me what happens in the line 17 of 25? I don't quite, not 17, not 25, yeah, 17. I don't understand this for all m dots.
All right. What you're saying is, normally you can class, so m is, I think it's called a polymorphic variable. I think that's what it's called. And m is thing for any type m. It doesn't matter. It could be int or it could be number. So you're saying it doesn't matter. So let me give you a function. Okay, let me give you an example. This may not compile, and if I'm wrong, you guys can help me out. But let's say I want to say right now x plus y, intuitively think about numbers, but for the sake of discussion, imagine it could be a string too, right? You're asking, I could say for all, I don't know, would this work? Let me see. For all n. So this will say for all n, I'm saying this works, but this will say plus is not defined for all n. So it could be some type which does not define a plus operation. So I think how I could do this is, I actually don't know what the right type is, but I could say, ID. Oh, you mean ID? Okay. Yeah. So ID would be takes A and returns back A, is it? And for all A such that, and then, actually, there's such that could be additional syntax, but let me. Yeah, normally there are sometimes there are qualifiers. Let me see if I can find a qualifier syntax, which is not too difficult. Where's this qualifier when you need one? Yeah, like this. So, okay. So, yeah, I didn't want to scare you out too, but I just want to give you a syntax. So you're saying a component, so you can say for all these variables such that h is qualified to be a, no, is it? No, actually this doesn't even do that. I'm trying to see if I can find a nice one before. Double. You know what? That's a good idea. Let me just search for double arrow.
So the byte functor there is you are restricting the age. You're saying for all age where you have like
No, yeah, this looks a bit different, but yeah, maybe I've gone too deep into the rabbit hole. But the idea is to say that this can be any type right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just m dot, and then what happens with this h component space HTML for line 20 now? If you could hold it.
So the question is, what happens over here?
No, line 18.
18, yeah.
Yeah. After m dot, you have like a few.
This thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is this function for all m will return back a value of type component. And it's parameterized, but the component, if you see, has all these types. So you're saying a component which is parameterized by an HTML, my query, this query, my input, this input, and this output, this output.
Okay, so the result of this, like the type of the component function is h dot component. Is how I should figure it?
The return type of this component function is h component.
I think one way to explain it too is like when you have num as a type class, and then an instance of num can be int and whatever other number.
Yeah.
That make that num concrete. So you could have like num int, and then that's your concrete type.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah. So
Okay, because probably I just can't parse this because usually I see these arrows here, like when you gave the first example with this,
yeah.
SQ101.
So maybe I should show you. That's what actually. So this is very similar to this initial state kind of thing. This doesn't take any value in and it gives back one int, right? So the component is like this int, but it's a more complex type. So that's how you can parse this thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so that's the hello world. And yeah, so now let me go to the next step. Okay, so we haven't taken anything, but what if you want to take an action? What if you want to increment a button or something? So let's now build a button and increment it. So the query would now be increment, right? This is the operation that you want to do on this component. And as you can see, right now for increment, I'm just going to increment by 1. So I don't need to get any value. But so this is what I see, increment. And then as I told you, you put A at the end. The input will be unit, output void, and now state becomes int. Initial state, 0. And this actually remains the same. So now let's use the HTML DSL builds. So normally, okay, let me just fill it up. I think it's getting wrong. So let's see why unemployed etchy. Okay, so part of it is actually an error, but you can see over here how PureScript is helping me be a better programmer and telling me where I make mistakes. So let me explain render right now. So render takes a state, right? And what's our state over here? It's an int. And then it composes this HTML document. And the document has got two things. One, a text which says increment button, and the other one is a button where when you click on the button, you call this action called increment. And this is the operation on a component. That's the increment that I've shown you over here. And as you can see, the moment we change everything, it doesn't compile. So I know that something is wrong. I have to change that immediately, which may be a bit more difficult in dynamic languages. So all I'm going to say is I have to handle this query. As you see, my query on the top was increment. So I have to handle this increment. I use do so I'm getting the state and I'm just incrementing by 1, right? That's increment. And the reason why I didn't want to talk much about pure next is that you just put it at the end like this, and all your work actually happens in between over here. So that's how I see it. That's how I work on it. So just to come back, you'll notice that this div has an underscore. So this is a convention when you don't want to give it. So if you look at the HTML tag, you can give it attributes. At the same time, afterwards, you have your actual content. This div underscore is saying, I'm not giving any attributes to it. At the same time, button has some attributes. Hey, if you click on me, call increment, and your actual text that you show for the button, right? So there could be an underscore option as well. In that case, you don't need this. It'll only be this. So that's a convention used in Halogen. But in our case, we want it, and this is how it'll be. So render, you get a state, you render the HTML, and the moment somebody clicks on the button, it'll call the action increment. When it calls the action, Halogen will then call eval with the increment action. And what we see over here is, okay, where's the state for the component? And as far as I see, Halogen maintains the state for you. And you have this method called modify, which gives you the state variable, and then you can add, okay, do what do you want with the state based on the action. Right now, I'm just going to increment it by 1. Let's see how this looks. Increment button, click on it. That's 1. And yeah, Here, an array. So these are, so this is an array of elements that can be in a div. So yeah, this is, so there's one element called text and there's one element called button. At the same time, a button can have probably many different attributes. The one attribute that it has is on click. Yeah, so because the state, so initially it was 0, right? When I first created the state, it was 0. When you first create a component, it says, give me back initial state as 0. Now, when I click on this button, it specifies when you click on it, you call the increment action, right? And when it calls the increment action, it actually says, hey, this action happening, so state may have to change. So it goes to eval, and then it says, hey, the increment action was called, do something, whatever you want. In my case, I'm saying, hey, increment by 1, so it'll be state plus 1. If I want to do it by 3, it'll be state by 3. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So the state is held by this Halogen module. And it won't give you a state. It'll just say, give me a function that I'll apply on the state for you. It's actually a state monad. I think it's a state monad. Yeah, it's just that I could be wrong, but I think this is a state monad. But you don't need to know about it. In most examples I worked on, I was happy to use modify. And I can live in a world where it tells me, I give you the state, I work on a state, and I give it back another state. I can work in that world. I don't need to know about state monad to work in a Halogen application for this, for now, at least for my. You see, so yeah, so those who are new to this is a Lambda function. Thank you for reminding me. Basically, I'm saying I'm giving you a function which takes one parameter and it does, this is the operation and it gives back a value. So I can call it x. Is that what you're asking me? Yeah, I can call it x because this is a function, right? I'm giving a function. I can name any variable in a function any way I want. So it doesn't matter. So if I do 5, 10, so it works. You can give it any value. That's why I don't need to know much about state monads, and for at least for my current examples. Yes. Oh, okay. So if you want to see, you can partially apply. So you have to help me with the syntax. So call plus.
I think in PureScript, yeah, you do plus, and then the 5 has to be outside those brackets.
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah? It works. Let me just double check. 10. So one thing I liked, and I think I first saw this in Scala, but what you could do is something like, so just for those who don't know, I'm saying this is actually a function which takes one parameter and whatever is a value will add to it and get back to it. So this is the same thing as me writing x. So that's how I would increment the function. Yeah.
Is there any difference at all between this syntax and Haskell syntax?
Mostly it's 99% the same syntax. I mean, yeah, like there are a few differences, but in most cases you could read Haskell and PureScript the same way. There are a few. I could point you to a document which describes the differences. For example, a dot operator in Haskell, because we have objects in JavaScript and hence in PureScript, dot is used for records or objects. So there are small syntactical changes. You can a handful of them, but in most cases, it's very similar, very similar. So, sorry, the question was the difference between Haskell and PureScript in terms of syntax. Okay, so now you know how to do an action. I will now move to the next part where what if you want to do an if effect? What do you want to call a server and get some value from the server and bring it back? I could not, I mean, I think there were some compilation issues, some library compatibility issues, so I could not simulate a server, but the random f type is very similar to me calling an external server and coming back. So I'll show you the random type, and it will be very similar for another type which calls a server, gets a value, and comes back.
It's not going to be asynchronous.
It's all going to be asynchronous.
Even random is asynchronous.
Yeah, I'll show you how. I'll show you how it's going to be. So let me now build. So we're going to generate the target right now is going to generate a random number. Input unit void, and then random gives back a number. So let's take that. And surprisingly, this doesn't fail for me. I thought this would fail, but 5 should fail for me. No? Or maybe because it fails below. Okay, so I should give it 5.0 to make it work. So now, coming to the question, this M actually stands for the monad or F monad. And in this case, we are F, we are doing random, it's an effect. So now it's time to actually type it out and say, I'm going to have, so instead of FM, now I'm going to type the actual type that we're going to use. So F, and you'll see it automatically brings down top over there. F, and I'm saying so don't get too hung up on this syntax, but because in the next versions they may simplify this into the IO monad that's in Haskell. So I think they realize that an IO makes things much more convenient. So this is kind of syntax which may slowly go away. And what I'm saying over here is unknown type random. So let me see if I can get this in. Okay, that thing worked. And state, okay, it's failing. Let's make it generate something. And by which this generate, and again over here now, since I'm using I'm class and specializing on the type, I will have to say, hey, and let me, so let's do generate. Like, so as I showed you, I can do R and do random, but then random will give me back the F type, which is synchronous. So the way you make it asynchronous is this is actually defined in the F module, and what you do, and I think Halogen makes it easy for you, and you do something called lift F random, and for now let's do this unknown type random. So yeah, this was just failing just before I started the demo, so I was like, okay, I hope it works. And oh, maybe that's the reason why. Thank you. That's what I like. Yeah. Group programming, the next version of pair programming. Thank you so much. Yeah. So random gives you back an F with the synchronous, and do a lift F, you can make it asynchronous. And that's how you convert a synchronous command into an asynchronous command. And if you had to do a call to a server, you would replace this with some other call. You would change the types over here, but the syntax is very similar. Any questions up to this point? Cool.
So now this modify doesn't need argument.
Technically, you don't need an argument because I'm just building a random. I could literally, I think, what can I do? Can I just directly say, no, I don't know. So, I don't know if I can do this. Well, let me just try. Doesn't matter. So, gives you random. So, yeah, I don't know how. Maybe I can even do a const r here, I think. Let me just double check. It works, yeah. And just double check. Now you're not seeing the old code. Okay.
The const random number.
Yeah, that is the irony. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Could we see the type signature of the generator?
The generate.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, it's over here. You mean this one?
But like, could we see the definition of generate? I just want to.
The definition of generate.
Yeah. So it's when a function from some A to a query of A.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a reverse of this. So I think it's basically what I'm doing right now is pattern matching. I'm saying if I had another action B A, I would then error out and I would have to have one more eval, which is action next, and then I have to work. I will have to write code to take care of it. Yeah, I noticed that too. I was a bit curious. I think it just. Sorry, no. I was saying I was just trying to show the pattern matching thing I would have to do. So if I create another action here, like this. So my query now has two operations: a generate operation and some random action. I call it.
Was it the fact that it was action B before just type O?
Yeah, it was just type. So yeah, no.
But it's actually matching on.
Yeah, it's matching. Yeah, it's just, I just want to show you the pattern matching. So this works. I know this was a mistake. So this is how you would deal with effects in a component. So now I think we come into the second part. That's okay. We're talking about single components, but how do you do a parent component and a child component? How do you handle that? So I've got a lot more to show you. So I'm just going to start copy pasting code now, and but at least I want to give you a simple introduction to it. Yeah, you're writing all. I think LLM and PureScript believe, and I'll show you an example afterwards. But it's all code like this. So
There are no JSX solutions.
not so JSX. I think I've seen it more in the context of React, and Halogen is like, does it work for React for you? So there are other the other PureScript libraries, which are React based, but you still don't use JSX. I think one of the benefits of Haskell and other ones, you can make these mini DSLs, which hide any syntax for you. So you could technically hide JSX behind the syntax.
But JSX actually translates into a function calls, right? It actually increases the readability of somebody.
Yeah,
Right? So you look at a portion of HTML in this place.
yeah.
It still reuse, your PureScript calls and functions inside JSX.
So the question I think was that JSX gives you this ability of seeing the HTML at the same time, right? And I think it looks easier. I think one of the things I like in this way is that I can now compose it using function. I could then refactor this out and refactor a different function and call that function over here. That in JSX as well? Okay, cool. I don't know much about JSX, to be honest. I've only seen React examples. But I guess this is the way I've seen it happen in most PureScript and Elm. I think Elm libraries too. I've seen that they have this style of writing your HTML.
How JSX works is actually being transpiled into JavaScript underneath. So I think you would require another layer here. So you would have to first transpile it into PureScript and then.
Probably right. Maybe the PureScript libraries that directly compile to JavaScript instead of JSX. So that could be it, yeah. I haven't really looked deep into it. So I saw a question somewhere? No? Okay, so I'm just going to copy. So we've done random. So now we're going to talk about request. So I'll first type child button. And then component. Okay, and then go back to component, and hopefully it gets it. Cool. And I'll just show you what it looks like. So this is my strict parent, and what I'm going to try and show you here is I click on an action over here and it'll increment fine. And then I click on this, the strict parent will ask the child component for values. This is the way of getting values from your child component into your parent component. So if it's 10 over here, this should show 10. And I'll just show you how it works now. So let's look at the child button component. So a new thing over here, as I told you, the query or the operation takes an action, increment. So the child itself increments itself, but it also has a second operation where somebody outside or itself can request information from it. And in this case, the information that you request is what is your count. And the syntax over here is you get used to this. So basically, whatever you want back as a value, you put it over here, and you end with an A. So this is the syntax that you use. Yeah, it's a bit difficult, but after a while, you get used to it. I know. I think because I didn't have enough time to dig deep into this, but no, the syntax is like this. So initial state 5 and component, all this is very similar. There's nothing much to talk over here. And now, as I said, there are two operations, your increment and get count. So your eval has to account for both of these. So I'm saying if you want increment, you take whatever value you get as state, and you add 1 to it and return back pure next. And a get count reply, reply is a function, and you take your state and you apply reply to it, and you give that back as the value. So h.get, I didn't show this, but you can also get the state that you want it using h.get. So I think this is maybe going into the state monad part. I think I could be wrong, but this is another way of getting state out and working with it. So this is the child button. This is very similar to what you've seen before, but I think the interesting part now for us to learn is the root component. Oops. So in the root component, that button that you saw over here, like this thing, is like get the child state. So that is one action that we're going to define with get child state A and state A. And what I'm going to define right now, because now this is a root component, is a child query. And I've imported the child button as button over here. And I'm going to define, the reason why I'm defining, I don't need to do this, but I'm defining because this helps me keep my signatures standard. I can just copy paste my signatures as is without worrying about what changes. So I'm just saying that my child query is my button query, initial state. And now we define a new concept called the slot. I think the slot corresponds to the slot maybe in Web Components API now in HTML. But if I had to see it, if I had to understand this, is that it's like an ID for your component. And I'll show you examples afterwards, but right now what I'm saying is I only have one component, and because I only have one component, I only need to give it one ID, and right now I'm going button slot. And I'll show you examples later, but I could say, you know what, maybe it's more easy if I show you what's. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to have 3 components of the same type in my application. I'm going to give them an ID of slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. So it's more like an ID for your child components. In this case, if you see over here, I only have one component. I only need one value. And for that, I could give button slot. At the same time, I could even use unit, to be honest, because unit is of a type of one value, right? So right now, I'll just keep it button slot because you can see where I'm using it.
Can you show where you use it?
Yeah, I'll show you down. I'll go down soon. And because I think, yeah, this is something you have to do. You have to derive instances. So you're basically saying over here that the button slot is also can be equal and can be ordered. So what changes over here, I don't know if you noticed, but previously it was a component, but now it's a parent component. So because this component is now a parent component, that's how you have to call it. And the signature changes a bit now. You call it a parent HTML. And I think previously it was something else. And then you give it the child query and the slot. So if by naming a child query, it's easy for me to copy paste the signatures. So let's see if I see anything interesting. You've already seen stuff like this. If you have a button, on click, get child state. And this is where you're talking about. And you have the child component, right? So just to show you, this is the child component text. And after that, you say, I'm slotting in a child component. This is my ID. Right now I only have one, so it's button slot. This is the component that I want to slot. Unit is saying right now over here, I'm not giving it any state from me. Whatever state it has or it wants, it can take on its own. And you'll see afterwards how you change that. And absurd is, say, it's a thing of type void. Let me see if we can. So it's of type void, and I didn't read too much into it, but basically you're saying this value, if I could get the syntax, I think what you're saying is, hey, I'll double check, I could be wrong, but normally over here you give something which the child can call back on the parent. But in this case, the child is not going to call back the parent, so it's saying it's not possible, so it's absurd. I like that. Sorry? Yeah, it's absurd that this would happen. And so, okay, our own component is child state. You're going to eval that right now over here. You'll notice that even the signature change is now parent DSL with something else before. It's a different kind of syntax, but it seems a bit complex now, but mostly you just copy paste it or you use a snippet or something. And what you're doing over here is you want to query the child, right? So when you click on the button here, over here, you want to query the child. So you're saying query the child with this ID button slot, and I'm going to make a request for you to get count. And if I look back at the child button, it's this thing, get count. So it'll call this action. And this action will give you back the state, and which you get back over here as the component. Now, the reason why it's maybe, I think it's a more complex reason. The component may not be there. It may not be available. So you get back nothing if the component is not available. Oh yeah, the dollar sign. The dollar sign, if I didn't have the dollar sign, it would be something like this. Otherwise, if I don't have this, it will read this as a query has 3 input button slot, edge request, and button get count. But that's not the case. Query, I believe, takes 2 parameters, a button slot and a request. And instead of writing parentheses everywhere, you can use it's saying everything after this is 1.
You have also this in Haskell.
It is Haskell as well. Yeah, right? Yeah. So I explained maybe to you. Maybe has nothing and just. So you have pattern matching. And this I'm saying, hey, if the case is a nothing, I'm going by 999. If it's something, give me back the child count. And then I'm saying, hey, modify the state. I don't care what your original state is. Now your state is going to be this child count, which I assigned over here. And then, as you see, pure next. So that's all this is. Any questions on this point?
That nothing. You don't expect to ever see that.
Generally, no. If I have defined a component, I think it should be there.
Yeah.
But since it's statically typed, you have to.
Yeah. Okay. So observe crash. Well, debug crash is what you do in NL.
I'm sorry.
I'm just sort of. It's a sort of a. It's not actually a linguistic question. It's sort of a why did you write it this way question.
I think it's not my choice. It's the framework will always give you back a maybe.
No,
Yeah.
Not why did you, no, I understand why you had to handle the nothing case.
Yeah.
Why did you handle it by passing back 999 rather than saying this is possible?
Oh, okay. No, I could do that, but this is simple for me for a demo.
Is it maybe because the state is of a type int, and you have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
pass an int?
So that's the value int. But I guess I don't know if there's a deeper question. What you're asking is why do I not assume? I mean, I know like if it crashes or something. I don't know. But right now, yeah, if my state from the child was a float or a number, I would have to put 99.00. So that's I'm just giving a default value. That's in a real world scenario, you may have an actual value. For example, if you're getting a string from your child, right? It gives back a string. If it doesn't give back a string, you can give a default string.
Okay.
Like,
Just as a side note, now debug crash has all value, it will always types checks
okay.
against any type.
Yeah,
Is
well,
there an
absurd
example?
will too.
Absurd?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could have just written absurd there.
Probably because I think void is uninhabited. Let me just try. No. Oh, a type. But then, how do I give a value back? Because void has no value.
Haskell has like error that like is polymorphic and returns some.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like there must be something like that.
Yeah. That's maybe in the next presentation.
Like I believe in real life, you probably would just make your state the maybe, right? It's probably like a closer
Yeah.
model what you want to express, right?
No. Yeah, and you'll see further. It's all maybe, but it's already a maybe now. So, but you're right. In many other cases, it is a maybe.
Would it work if you commented out the line 49?
Comment this out.
Uh-huh.
If I comment this out, I'm saying that my parent has no child. So
Yeah, that's what I want to see. If you will get the sign here.
I probably still will because it's choosing. Uh,
Because now the button with this slot doesn't exist in the markup.
I think 99 may very well be the state, my own state. So my state is int. I think if I change the number,
Could we just see in the page what the page?
so this is, I think now is the issue. Yeah. So you can go back and say what you want. So let me change this. And so you want me to? Oh, so you want to see what happens now?
Yeah.
Cool. Good point. I never tried that. Let me see if this compiles. Yeah. And good one. I sure actually tried that. I
Click the button now.
but there's no button to click over to get back. So oh, you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, thank you. That was a nice, easy way of explaining that. Cool. Any other questions? So I think it's getting a bit later than others. So I'm just going to go directly and explain something which may hit you in a real case scenario. And that would be the other things as well. Which I didn't take a print of. Oh yeah, there you go. So the other ways of talking to it, and I don't, maybe I should do, just see how much time I have. I think I'll talk for another 10 more minutes. I'll just show you one more thing which I think is interesting, and then okay, since I'm directly might as well copy from here then, instead of looking in my notes. So one more thing I'm interested in showing you is the input. Okay, child button. And component. So let's save child button. Let's save component. And what's the issue? So input. So it gets int, and my state over here is int. I didn't compile. It was just taking some time to compile. So let me show you first what I means. So this is my parent component, and this example is showing you how do you pass input from the parent to your children. So if I click on one over here, there are two components here. Child state, this is the first component, and this is the second component, but each will react differently to my input. So if I do +1, the first one will just show some default state, and the second one will multiply it. So now I'm going to show you how that works. So this is all very similar. You've seen things like this before, child query, button query. Now obviously, I use slot int because I've got two components here, the first one and the second one, so I have to have an ID. And right now I'm using slot 1, slot 2. If I derive the instance, my initial state is 6. Everything else is similar. And there you see, go. So everything is similar. You don't worry about that. And what I'm saying over here is my first slot, this is my ID for it. It's unique. And this is the component that you give it into it. And whenever you re-render me, the parent component, pass my state to it. And the other one gets the square of the state, right? And this is almost taken care, excuse me, by Halogen. I don't have to do any wiring. I just specify what value input goes from the parent to the child. So the child is almost very similar. You don't need to, I mean, you don't need to go into deep into it, but if I click a button here, this goes over. So if I click on the button over here, it increments it. That would then call eval with the next action. Eval will change the state. Because the state got changed, this will be called, render could be called again, and the new state will be passed to the child component. And maybe I can show you one more and I will close.
You understand the difference between observe and const nothing?
So this was when, for some reason, absurd wasn't working for me. It was giving me a compile error. And then I dug deep into, I mean, looked in the syntax, and I found that const nothing works. So this is something I have to figure out. I think it's a mistake I'm making somewhere over here, and I haven't figured it out yet. So I found out that const nothing works in this case. I don't know the exact reason. That's interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to show you one last thing, and then I will close for the night. So I showed you a request. I showed you an input. Oh yeah, multi-component. Okay. So this is where you'll see over here, I've got these three components. I'm not going to go deep into it. They are like normal components. But let me show you how they look. So this is component 1, component A, component B, component C. And then what I'm going to show you over here is that Halogen needs if you have different components of different types, you have to do something special in Halogen to make it compile. So let me just show you how it works. So if I increment this by 2, and I do check state now, toggle me is off, so this is just false off, just 2 and just hello. If I give Rajiv, that too, and I do check states now, it'll say just RJI. So this is the example over here is trying to tell us how do I use components of different types together. And you need to do something different for this. So over here, we learned 2 things. Let's go ahead and do this. The first thing is this is my original component, so I'm going to call in 3 components over here, bring them in, and then I will. Okay, my operation for my parent component is to read the state. Sorry, and then my state now is the state value that each of this child component gives me back. So the first one gives me back a Boolean, the second one gives me back a maybe int, and the third gives me a string. And now this is what is. So previously had one component that was fine, but now we have components, each one has your own query. And to explain this, I have to first explain either. So we all remember either, right? So we have either A, B, is left A or right B. I just want to get the wrong thing in here. And what either gives me is an option to, let me just build this up first, to get a left value or a right value. Either 3 is, I can also call this the same thing as either 2, basically I got two values coming in, a left A or left B. Either 3 is more defined as like this, A, B, C, and this is left A or either to A or B or C. And this won't compile. I don't know why, but so this is how. So it kind of nests, and that's why if you see over here, either 3 is in the nested module for either. So we'll notice over here, either in simple way gives you this way of saying I have two different values, left or A, they can be different types, but that's still fine. Either lets you define a sum or union, if I use the words correctly, on the right-hand side of the equal sign, the data constructors. The coproduct does the same thing for the left-hand side of that is the type constructors. So coproduct is a way of saying, in our case, in the context of Halogen, saying my child query is either the first query or the second query or the third component query. So in a simple way, if I had to remember this, is like if you understand either, coproduct is the either for type constructors. So because I have 3 components, I have to use coproduct 3. And I think we have to be careful that.
Excuse me, if you have 100 components, you have coproduct 100?
I believe you can. There's a way to do it.
Okay.
No, I think they name it for the first 10, and afterwards they give you a generic way of doing it. I haven't gone deep into it. I think it should be possible. I just don't know it. We could check afterwards. After the talk, we could check if you want to. So yeah, where I see coproduct is like the either type, but for the left-hand side, that's for the type constructors. So my initial state is or maybe, so it's nothing. And same parent component. So I think now we're going to these 3 different boxes for each subcomponent. So let me define. So here, finally, you see that we're now using the CSS. You're saying the class name box, and I had to predefine this. If you look at the source, not here, but yeah. So over here, if you see, this is index.html, and I had to go over here and define the CSS over here. You can define CSS inside the code as well. I didn't get time to research that, but for now, I'm using this. So you see the box and the box head one over here, and this is what I'm using over here. So class name box and the text component. And yeah, these are the things you have to do if you have different components. So you see last time, I don't know if you remember, but it was slot. But now you have slot, what do you call this? Prime? Slot prime. And over here, previously, if I remember, I called it absurd and it worked. It didn't work, but here it works. So I think I'm doing something wrong. And we give the difference between slot and slot prime is this variable over here. Everything else is the same. And this variable is called CP, it's called child path. And I don't know too much about this, but if you have different components of different types, you have to use this as a way of differentiating them. So you have in the child path itself, you have things like, CP1, CP2, you can have CPN, but if I can go over here and show you, this is child path for the first coproduct for the first either one. And the second div is very similar, the second component, third component, and you show a state. This is all very similar. And over here, previously, if you remember, you had query, and now you have query prime. The only difference, again, is, of course, the child path. Everything else over here is similar. So the first one gets A from the first component get state. So if I go in to get, if I go in, you can see this is component A, there's get state over here, it gives back Boolean, and so on. And this is a good opportunity to see another feature of PureScript. So normally we would have an object like this, and that works too. But if the variable is of the same name as the key, you can directly reduce your syntax and call it ABC. And yeah. So when you first come to Halogen, you're like, okay, there's so many of these things to remember. Is it worth it? That's a question. Depends on where you fall into how easily you want to program and how much you want the framework to catch errors. I feel like the next thing will be learning other frameworks, and I guess that's a segue into the program as well. The other frameworks which may not be, I think I lost one of my slides. No. So if you want more resources, I use the Slam data. They made the PureScript Halogen. You can get there. If you want a quick starter project, you have the PureScript Halogen template, and the demo I made is based on that template. This is an interesting article which compares all the UI frameworks in Haskell, Pure JavaScript, PureScript, and Elm. And it tries to give you comparisons about their performance. And they've done a very good job, and I would recommend you check them out. This is a site, and one thing I want to show you, which is really cool, I'm sure this is there for others as well, but this is Try PureScript, where you don't need to bring anything. You don't need to. You can directly play with PureScript online and make mistakes and learn from it. And it'll all be real time. And this is really cool. And it supports a lot of libraries. So, and you can play with PureScript online. I would really recommend you trying this out. And you have Thermite and other so and so things. And what are the other alternatives out there in the PureScript land? So you have PureScript Thermite, which is actually a wrapper on another library in PureScript React, which is a wrapper on React. It uses the ProFunctor Lens library, which I haven't worked with. And if you're interested in that, you can check it out. There's PureScript Box, which is extremely readable. It is inspired by Elm, but the pre-17 architecture, which I think was way different from then on. And I don't know if they have updated. But what I'm looking forward to is something called PureScript Spark, where I believe maybe the latest architecture. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
So does Halogen include like REST libraries, like wrappers for making REST calls?
I don't think Halogen does it by itself, but I think you'll have to use another library. And for example, if I do, it's not in this library, I think it's over here. And what I could not make work because I was having build issues is something like this. You would do an Ajax launch F, you would do this, and then you get the value. And
that's the same AFF that Halogen uses?
I think that's internal same AFF. And you would do over here. I think it's already in the F module, but if it was synchronous, you would do a lift F and make it an F, and you would use it normally.
How about GraphQL?
Don't know yet, but it's still early stages. This is more like an early adopter stage, but I still think that if I want to learn statically typed functional languages, and I want to use it wherever there's JavaScript, this is the best I've seen so far. So it's a mismatch of somebody building it, but right now I don't know of any. Cool. Oh yeah.
So how do you know how you deal with in Halogen,
Good question. I don't know. I haven't done that, so I can't really answer the question. But let me look it up and come back to you. Uh,
Is there anything built in would be like subset,
so I didn't show that.
which would solve that problem?
There is, they have like a output. So I didn't show the example out of time, but I can quickly show it to you. So this example is for the kind of pops up thing between parent and child. I don't know if this applies to child, but the way you do it is, I won't make this run. I'll just snapshots. It's called output. So I call it output, but they also call it as messages. So the child can pass a message to the parent, and maybe the same happens for siblings as well. So how it works is if I show the child. So I call it output, but you could also call it as message. And basically you're saying, if something happened to me, I send a message or output to whoever's interested that I've incremented something. And the way you do it is you raise and you say, hey, I have raised an increment message and this is the value over there. And the child, the parent component will then has to say when it creates a slot, it says, hey, when you're raising, call me at this place, at this action. And if you see handle child changed is one of the operations over here, and then automatically it'll call handle child changed over here, and that's how you respond to a message coming from the child. So this is from parent to child. I don't know how it happens, if it happens by siblings.
Problem is the two siblings aren't in the same scope anymore.
I don't see how to connect them so far, and I haven't seen it in the guide, so maybe the parent has to relate. That's my guess, but I can't be for sure. All right. If you have any more questions, you can always talk to me after. I'll be here for a while. But thank you for being a patient audience. I know this has been a difficult type journey for you guys, but you've been here all to the end, so thank you very much.